Professor Eleanor Wright wiped the dust from her glasses as she carefully examined the worn photograph. The basement of Missouri State Archives was always cold, but today a particular chill ran through her bones. The 1911 family portrait of the Hollowbrook family had been discovered in a sealed box during the renovation of their former estate, now a historical museum outside Springfield. "Look at this," she whispered to her research assistant, James, the mirror in the background. James leaned closer, squinting in the dim archival light. "What am I looking at exactly?" Eleanor pointed to each of the 4 children positioned in front of an ornate Victorian mirror. "See how each child's reflection is. Wrong? This boy is smiling in person but frowning in the reflection. This girl has her hands at her sides, but in the mirror her hands are clasped. That's just photographic distortion or damage to the print," James said dismissively. "I've been analyzing historical photographs for 20 years, Eleanor replied, her voice firm. "This isn't damage. Look at the parents. The reflections are normal." James's expression shifted from skepticism to unease. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Eleanor said, sliding the photograph into a protective sleeve. "But I think we need to visit Hollowbrook Estate." 3 days later, Eleanor's sedan crunched along the gravel driveway leading to the imposing Victorian mansion. Fall had painted the surrounding Missouri countryside in amber and crimson, but Hollowbrook Estate remained stubbornly gray, its weathered limestone exterior unchanged by the seasons. The museum curator, Dr. Martin Blackwood, greeted them at the entrance. A tall man with a perpetually furrowed brow, he'd initially been reluctant to allow Eleanor's special research visit, but had relented when she'd mentioned potential publication opportunities. "The Hollowbrook family lived here for 3 generations, he explained as they walked through the foyer. "Charles Hollowbrook made his fortune in mining before settling here with his wife Margaret in 1890. They had 4 children, twins Elizabeth and Edward, followed by Catherine and little Henry." "And what happened to them?" Eleanor asked, noting the curator's hesitation. "The official record states the children all died of tuberculosis within weeks of each other in 1912, he replied. "Charles and Margaret lived another decade, but they became recluses. Local stories say they never recovered from their grief." Eleanor nodded, feeling a familiar tingle at the base of her skull, the sensation she experienced whenever history was hiding something. "And the mirror from the photograph, is it still here?" Dr. Blackwood's pause was almost imperceptible. "Yes, it's in the master bedroom. We keep that room closed to the public. There have been ... incidents." "What kind of incidents?" James asked, his visitors feeling unwell. "A few claimed to see things that couldn't be there." The curator cleared his throat. "Superstitious nonsense, of course." As they climbed the grand staircase, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder several times, catching only glimpses of empty hallways and closed doors. The master bedroom was located at the end of the east wing. Dr. Blackwood unlocked the heavy oak door, which creaked on its hinges as if protesting their intrusion. And there it was, the mirror. Standing 7 feet tall in an ornate gold frame, positioned exactly where it had been in the photograph more than a century ago. "We've tried to remove it several times, Doctor," Blackwood admitted quietly. "But strange accidents always happen. Eventually we decided to leave it be." Eleanor approached the mirror slowly. Its surface was cloudy with age, but still reflective enough to show her distorted image. She reached out, her fingers hovering inches from the glass. "I wouldn't touch that," Dr. Blackwood warned. But Eleanor was already tracing the Latin inscription carved into the frame. "Animi speculo captus," souls captured in glass. Eleanor spent the next week buried in research, barely leaving her cramped university office. The Hollowbrook family had left surprisingly few records for such prominent members of Missouri society. Most curious was how little information existed about the children's deaths. 4 children dying of tuberculosis within weeks would have been noteworthy even in 1912. Yet local newspapers contained only brief obituaries with no details. "I found something," James said, entering her office with a stack of photocopied documents. Court records from 1913. Charles Hollowbrook was briefly investigated for the deaths of his children. Eleanor looked up sharply. "On what grounds?" The family doctor became suspicious when he wasn't called to examine any of the children during their supposed illnesses. The investigation was abruptly closed when the doctor himself died in an accident. Eleanor felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "What else?" "I traced the mirror's provenance," James continued. "Charles Hollowbrook purchased it from an antiquities dealer in New Orleans who specialized in items with questionable histories. The dealer was later found dead in his shop, his face reportedly frozen in an expression of extreme terror." Eleanor spread the photograph on her desk again, studying the children's reflections. We need to find living relatives, anyone who might have family stories about what happened at Hollowbrook. Their search led them to Sarah Hollowbrook, a great niece of Charles living in a nursing home in Kansas City. Though in her 90s, Sarah's mind remained sharp, her eyes clear and alert when they mentioned Hollowbrook Estate. My mother warned me never to go there, she told them, her thin fingers trembling slightly. She was Charles's niece, just a girl when it happened. She said the official story was a lie. What really happened to the children? Eleanor asked gently. Sarah leaned forward. They didn't die of tuberculosis. They disappeared, one by one. Margaret would find empty beds in the morning with no sign of how the children had left. The authorities suspected Charles had done something horrible and hidden the bodies, but they could never prove it. And did your mother have any theories? James prompted. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. She said Margaret blamed the mirror, said she saw her children inside it sometimes, watching her, their little hands pressed against the glass as if trying to get out. The elderly woman shuddered. Mother told me Margaret tried to break the mirror once, but the hammer turned in her hand and struck her instead. As they left the nursing home, Eleanor felt increasingly certain they were unraveling something beyond ordinary historical research. We need to go back to the estate, she decided. Tonight the museum closes at 5, James reminded her. Eleanor pulled out her phone. Then we'll need Dr. Blackwood's help. The curator was reluctant, but eventually agreed to meet them after hours. 30 minutes, he insisted over the phone. That's all I'm giving you. As dusk fell, they returned to Hollowbrook Estate. The mansion loomed against the darkening sky, its windows like vacant eyes watching their approach. Dr. Blackwood met them at the service entrance. I shouldn't be doing this, he muttered as he unlocked the door. What exactly are you hoping to find? I'm not sure, Eleanor admitted. But those children deserve to have their true story told. As they climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, the temperature seemed to drop with each step. Eleanor's breath clouded in front of her face by the time they reached the landing. That's strange, Dr. Blackwood frowned. The heating system should be working. When they entered the master bedroom, the mirror awaited them in the gloom, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. Eleanor approached it cautiously, camera in hand, determined to document any anomalies. But when she raised the camera to photograph the mirror, the battery died instantly. James's camera failed next, followed by their phones. This is ridiculous, Dr. Blackwood said, his scientific skepticism battling with visible unease. Some kind of electromagnetic, he stopped mid-sentence, staring transfixed at the mirror's surface. Eleanor and James turned to look. For a brief moment, so brief Eleanor almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, the reflection showed not the 3 adults standing in the bedroom, but 4 solemn-faced children in Edwardian clothing, their eyes wide with silent pleading. Did you see that? Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible in the suddenly stifling room. Doctor. Blackwood's face had drained of color. It's not possible, he muttered, but his academic certainty had vanished. He backed toward the door. We need to leave. Now. Wait, Eleanor said, stepping closer to the mirror despite an instinctive revulsion. If what we saw was real, if somehow the Hollowbrook children are trapped in there, we can't just walk away. The curator shook his head vehemently. Whatever's happening here, it's not our concern. This is beyond historical research, Professor Wright, but Eleanor couldn't let it go. Something about those children's faces, their silent desperation, resonated with her on a level that transcended professional curiosity. You can leave if you want to, but I'm staying. James looked torn, his loyalty to Eleanor warring with his growing fear. I'll stay too, he finally said, though he kept his distance from the mirror. Dr. Blackwood hesitated at the doorway. 15 minutes, he conceded reluctantly. Then we're all leaving, regardless of what you've found. Eleanor nodded and turned back to the mirror. Its surface appeared normal now, reflecting only the dimly lit bedroom and its 3 anxious occupants. She carefully approached it again, notebook in hand since their electronic devices had failed. I've read about objects that supposedly trap spirits, she said, thinking aloud. Most are just superstition, but certain belief systems hold that specially crafted items can capture souls under specific circumstances. That's not history. That's supernatural nonsense, Dr. Blackwood objected, but his protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. Eleanor ignored him, studying the Latin inscription again. The phrasing is unusual. Not just reflections, but specifically souls. And captured, not a neutral term like contained or held. A sudden draft swirled through the room, though all windows were closed. The temperature plunged further, their breath now forming thick clouds in the frigid air. It's the electromagnetic disruption, the temperature drop. These are commonly reported phenomena in cases of ... double quotes. James trailed off, unwilling to say the word. Paranormal activity, Eleanor finished for him. I know how it sounds, but we have to consider all possibilities. She pulled a small notebook from her bag and began sketching the mirror and making notes. As she worked, the overhead light flickered once, twice, then stabilized at a lower intensity, casting long shadows across the Victorian wallpaper. Dr. Blackwood checked his watch nervously. 8 minutes left. Eleanor nodded absently, her focus on the mirror. The children disappeared in 1912, one by one. What if they didn't leave the house at all? What if they were somehow drawn into this mirror? As if in response to her words, a soft sound filled the room. The faint laughter of children playing, distant yet somehow intimately close. All three adults froze, listening to the impossible sound. The laughter faded, replaced by a soft tapping. Eleanor's eyes widened as she saw it, a small handprint appearing on the inside of the glass as if pressed from within, then another beside it, slightly larger. 4 distinct handprints materialized, corresponding to the 4 Hollowbrook children. My God, breathed James, his skepticism crumbling. Dr. Blackwood moved toward the door. Time's up. We're leaving right now. But as he reached for the doorknob, it refused to turn. He rattled it frantically, then threw his shoulder against the heavy wood, but the door remained firmly shut. This isn't possible, he gasped, true fear entering his voice for the first time. These doors don't lock from the outside. Eleanor barely registered his panic. She was transfixed by the mirror where the handprints remained visible, making a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. She stepped forward and pressed her own hand against the glass, matching it to one of the small prints. The surface beneath her fingers felt not like solid glass, but like water, cool and yielding. For one terrifying moment she felt a pull, as if something on the other side were trying to draw her in. She yanked her hand back with a gasp. Where her hand had touched the mirror, the glass now rippled like disturbed water, the effect spreading outward in concentric circles. "What have you done?" Dr. Blackwood demanded, his academic composure completely shattered. Before Eleanor could respond, the ripples in the mirror's surface stilled, and the glass became reflective again, but what it reflected was no longer the bedroom. Instead, they saw what appeared to be the interior of Hollowbrook Estate as it might have looked in 1912, pristine and occupied. And standing in that reflected room were the 4 Hollowbrook children, their expressions solemn and knowing. The oldest girl, Elizabeth, Eleanor presumed, stepped forward in the reflection until her face nearly touched the glass. Her lips moved, forming words they couldn't hear. "What is she saying?" James whispered. Eleanor stepped closer, straining to understand. The girl's mouth moved again, more deliberately, and this time Eleanor caught the words. "He put us here. Help us get out." "Who put you there?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your father, Charles Hollowbrook?" The girl in the mirror shook her head, her expression growing more urgent. She pointed to something out of their view, then mouthed more words that Eleanor couldn't decipher. "We need to establish clearer communication," Eleanor said, turning to James and Dr. Blackwood. "Any ideas?" Dr. Blackwood had retreated to the furthest corner of the room, his scientific worldview visibly crumbling in the face of the impossible. James, however, was already rummaging through his bag. "What about this?" he suggested, producing a small whiteboard and marker he used for archival notes. "If they can see us as we see them, ... double quotes." Eleanor nodded and took the whiteboard. She wrote in large letters, "Who trapped you?" and held it up to the mirror. The children conferred with one another. Then the oldest boy, Edward, stepped forward. He mimed writing, then pointed at the whiteboard. "They want to write too," Eleanor realized. "But how?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Blackwood stepped forward, his academic curiosity apparently overcoming his fear. "The mirror's surface changed when you touched it," he said to Eleanor. "It became permeable. Perhaps small objects can pass through." Eleanor hesitated, then offered the marker toward the mirror's surface. For a moment nothing happened. Then she felt that same strange sensation of resistance giving way, as if pushing through a membrane, and the marker slipped from her fingers. On the other side of the glass, Edward caught it, his eyes wide with surprise and what might have been hope. He uncapped the marker and wrote on the wall behind him in large, childish letters, "The Mirror Man." "The Mirror Man? The Mirror Man?" James read aloud. "Who is that?" Edward wrote again. "He sold IT to father, said IT was special, could show true selves." Eleanor exchanged glances with James. "The antiquities dealer from New Orleans," she murmured. Elizabeth took the marker next. He came back. "Knights," whispered to US through glass. The youngest boy, Henry, clutched at his sister's dress, his face frightened even across the impossible divide. "Said we were pure souls, needed for his collection." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine that had nothing to do with the room's supernatural cold. "The dealer was collecting souls," she said softly. "Children's souls," Catherine, the third child, wrote next. One by one, Mirror pulled US in, Parents couldn't see us anymore. But why would the dealer want to trap children in the mirror? Dr. Blackwood asked, his academic mind still attempting to impose logic on the inexplicable. Eleanor thought about the antiquities dealer's mysterious death, his face frozen in terror. Maybe he didn't fully understand what he was dealing with either. The mirror might have been using him just as it used the Hollowbrook family, Elizabeth wrote again, her letters becoming more urgent. Trapped 113 years. Not alone here. Others too. Older. Angrier. Help us. We need to break the mirror, James said firmly. Set them free. Dr. Blackwood shook his head. Sarah Hollowbrook said Margaret tried that. The mirror protected itself somehow. Eleanor considered this. Physical force won't work. We need to understand how the mirror functions. Elizabeth, she addressed the girl directly, do you know how the mirror traps souls? The girl conferred with her siblings before writing, reflection swap, real for mirror. When he says words, what words? Eleanor pressed. Edward wrote, Latin, like on frame. Eleanor examined the inscription again. Animi speculo captus. It's an incantation, she realized. But it would need to be more than just these 3 words. There must be a longer ritual. Catherine wrote, he had book. Black with red symbol. We need to find that book, Eleanor decided. It might contain the reversal ritual. Dr. Blackwood, despite his earlier skepticism, offered a suggestion. The Hollowbrook family papers were donated to the Missouri Historical Society. If this mirror man was in business correspondence with Charles, there might be records. That's our next step then, Eleanor agreed. But we can't leave these children alone again. She turned to the mirror. We'll come back tomorrow with more information. Stay strong. Elizabeth nodded solemnly and wrote one last message. Hurry. Others want out too. Not all like us, some ... wrong, as if to emphasize her warning. The reflection suddenly wavered, the children's images blurring. For a brief moment, Eleanor glimpsed something behind them, shadowy figures with distorted features, reaching toward the children with elongated fingers. Then the mirror's surface reverted to normal glass, reflecting only the 3 stunned adults in the Victorian bedroom. The door behind them clicked and swung open on its own. The Missouri Historical Society's archive was housed in a modern building that contrasted sharply with the historical documents it contained. Eleanor, James, and surprisingly Dr. Blackwood worked methodically through boxes of Hollowbrook family papers. The curator had called in sick to the museum, his skepticism now replaced by a shaken belief in what they'd witnessed. Found something, James called, holding up a yellowed envelope. Correspondence from Desmond Blackwood, purveyor of antiquities, dated 1910. Dr. Blackwood looked up sharply. Blackwood? That's my surname. Eleanor took the letter, her gloved hands careful with the fragile paper. It might be coincidence, she said, though her voice betrayed doubt. The letter was formal business correspondence describing the mirror as a most unique acquisition from the Orient, capable of revealing one's truest nature. The price listed was exorbitant even by modern standards. Look at the letterhead, Dr. Blackwood said, pointing to a small red symbol embossed at the top, a circle containing an inverted triangle. The red symbol Catherine mentioned, Eleanor confirmed. And Desmond Blackwood, could he be your ancestor? Dr. Blackwood's face had grown pale. My great-grandfather was named Desmond. He was from New Orleans. My family never spoke much about him, except that he died under unfortunate circumstances. The dealer who was found dead in his shop, James connected, his face frozen in terror. Dr. Blackwood swallowed hard. I took the curator position at Hollowbrook Estate 3 years ago because of the connection to my family name. I thought it was just an interesting coincidence. Eleanor felt pieces clicking into place. You were drawn there. The mirror has been waiting for a Blackwood to return. They continued searching, now with renewed urgency. In a box labeled Personal Effects, they discovered a small diary belonging to Margaret Hollowbrook. The entries grew increasingly disturbed as they progressed through 1911 and into 1912. January 15th, 1912. Elizabeth said the most peculiar thing today. She claims the mirror in our bedroom whispers to her at night. I told her it was just dreams. February 3rd. Edward has begun sleepwalking. Found him standing before the mirror at 3 a.m., his hand pressed against the glass as if greeting someone. February 17th. That man came again today. Desmond Blackwood. Charles says he's checking on our satisfaction with the mirror, but I don't like how he looks at the children, like they're commodities. March 4th. Elizabeth is gone. We've searched everywhere. Charles suspects kidnapping, but how could someone take her without breaking in? The doors were locked from the inside. The entries continued, documenting each child's disappearance with increasing desperation. The final entry was the most disturbing. April 10th. I saw them in the mirror last night. All 4 of my babies watching me. Henry pressed his little hand against the glass. I tried to touch him, and for a moment I felt his warmth. The glass became like water. It tried to pull me in too, but Charles dragged me away. He says I'm having a nervous breakdown. He's called for the doctor, but I know what I saw. That devil Blackwood has done something unnatural. Charles won't listen. He keeps that mirror even though our children are trapped inside. Sometimes I think he prefers them this way, seen but not heard, perfect forever. Eleanor closed the diary, her hands trembling slightly. Margaret knew. She tried to tell people, but no one believed her. What happened to her? James asked. Dr. Blackwood, who had been silent, spoke up. According to museum records, Margaret Hollowbrook was committed to the Missouri State Asylum in late 1912. She died there a year later, and Charles lived on in that house. With the mirror that contained his children, Eleanor said quietly, "Did he know the truth? Or did he convince himself Margaret was insane?" They continued searching until closing time, but found no mention of the book Catherine had described. As they left the archive, Dr. Blackwood seemed lost in thought. "I need to show you something," he finally said. "At my apartment." His place was small and sparsely furnished, dominated by bookshelves. He led them to a locked cabinet in his study and removed an old leather-bound book. The cover was black, embossed with a familiar red symbol, a circle containing an inverted triangle. "I inherited this from my father," he explained, his voice strained. "It's been in our family for generations. I never opened it, never wanted to. But I think this might be what we're looking for." The book was written in Latin with diagrams and illustrations that made Eleanor's skin crawl. She translated sections aloud, her voice growing more horrified with each passage. "The ars speculorum, the art of mirrors," she read. "A properly consecrated mirror becomes a vessel for souls, which are the purest form of energy. The collector who masters this art may extend his life by absorbing the captured essences." So that's what he was doing, James said. Capturing children's souls to extend his own life. Eleanor continued reading. "The younger the soul, the purer its energy. Children, being untainted by the world, provide the greatest power." But it backfired, Dr. Blackwood added. Something went wrong when he tried to absorb their energy. Eleanor flipped through the pages until she found what appeared to be a ritual description. To release a captured soul requires sacrifice. Blood of the captor's line must touch the glass while the words of unbinding are spoken. All eyes turned to Dr. Blackwood. "Blood of the captor's line," James repeated. "You're Desmond Blackwood's great-grandson, Doctor." Blackwood stared at the book, conflict evident on his face. All these years, the mirror has been waiting for a Blackwood to return. Not just to continue the collection, double quotes, but because only a Blackwood can free those trapped inside. Eleanor finished. The curator closed the book with a decisive snap. "We go back tonight." Night had fallen by the time they returned to Hollowbrook Estate, the old mansion a looming silhouette against the star-filled Missouri sky. "Doctor," Blackwood's hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the service entrance. "I've been working here for 3 years," he said quietly. "All this time, those children were watching me, waiting." The house felt different at night, more alive somehow. The old wood creaking and settling with sounds that seemed almost like whispers. Quote, "They made their way upstairs to the master bedroom, flashlights cutting through the darkness since Dr. Blackwood had disabled the security system and left the electricity off to avoid detection. When they entered the bedroom, the mirror was waiting. Even without illumination, its surface seemed to glow with a faint inner light. Eleanor stepped forward, half expecting to see the Hollowbrook children immediately, but the mirror showed only their normal reflections. "Elizabeth? Edward?" she called softly. "We're back. We found the book." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the mirror's surface rippled and the children appeared. They looked weaker somehow, their forms less substantial. Behind them, the shadowy figures Eleanor had glimpsed before were more distinct, now distorted human shapes with hollow eyes and reaching hands. Elizabeth raised a trembling hand to write on the wall behind her. "Hurry, they're getting stronger." "Who are they?" Eleanor asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Others, taken before US, over centuries, lost themselves, want to escape." "What happens if they escape?" James asked. Edward took the marker. "They need bodies. Ours too weak now." The implication was clear. These entities would take over the bodies of anyone who helped free them. Dr. Blackwood opened the black book, his face set with determination. "The ritual requires blood of the captor's line and the words of unbinding. It seems straightforward enough." "Wait," Eleanor cautioned. "If those things are trying to escape too, we need to be careful. Is there a way to free only the children?" They consulted the book again, poring over the ancient Latin text by flashlight. "Here," Eleanor pointed. "It says the liberator must visualize the specific souls to be freed while speaking the incantation. Focus is essential, or all imprisoned souls may escape at once." Dr. Blackwood nodded grimly. I'll need to concentrate on the Hollowbrook children specifically. He pulled a small pocket knife from his jacket, his hand steadier now. The incantation needs to be spoken while my blood touches the glass. Then I need to visualize each child I want to free. Eleanor placed a supportive hand on his arm. We'll help you focus. We've seen their faces, know their names. In the mirror. The children had drawn closer together, the shadowy figures pressing in around them. Catherine wrote urgently, "Now, before too late." Dr. Blackwood took a deep breath and sliced his palm, wincing at the pain. Blood welled in his hand as he began reciting the Latin phrases from the book, his voice gaining strength with each word. He pressed his bloodied palm against the mirror's surface. The glass yielded beneath his touch, rippling outward from the point of contact. The temperature in the room plummeted, frost forming on the windows despite the mild autumn night outside. The flashlights flickered and died, leaving only the mirror's eerie glow illuminating their faces. "Doctor," Blackwood continued the incantation, his eyes fixed on the children in the mirror. "Elizabeth, Edward, Catherine, Henry Hollowbrook," he called, his voice echoing strangely in the frozen air. "I see you. I free you." The mirror's surface began to pulse with light, brighter with each repetition of the ritual words. The children in the reflection reached toward the glass, their expressions a mixture of hope and terror. But the shadowy figures behind them were moving too, pressing forward, clawing at the boundary between worlds. Their features became momentarily visible, twisted, hungry faces that had once been human but had lost all humanity during their long imprisonment. "Something's wrong," James shouted over the rising wind that had inexplicably filled the closed room. "They're all trying to come through." Dr. Blackwood faltered in the incantation, his concentration breaking. In that moment of hesitation, one of the shadow figures lunged forward, merging with Edward's reflection. The boy's face contorted in a way no child's face should, his eyes blackening as the entity began to possess him. "No!" Eleanor cried. She grabbed the book from Dr. Blackwood and scanned it frantically, searching for something they'd missed. "Here!" she shouted. "The final line, it seals the mirror against those not specifically named." "Doctor." Blackwood resumed the ritual, adding the final phrases, Eleanor pointed out. Blood continued to flow from his hand, spreading across the mirror's surface in crimson streams that seemed to be absorbed into the glass itself. The wind reached a crescendo, papers flying from the desk, picture frames crashing to the floor. The mirror's glow had become blinding, forcing them to shield their eyes. With a sound like shattering ice, the mirror's surface fractured, not breaking but opening. 4 small forms tumbled into the room, solid and real: Elizabeth, Edward, Catherine, and little Henry Hollowbrook, dressed in their Edwardian clothing, exactly as they had appeared in the 1911 photograph. Behind them, visible through the still-open portal, the shadow figures howled in silent rage, clawing at a barrier they could no longer cross. Dr. Blackwood shouted the final words of the sealing incantation, and the mirror's surface solidified again, trapping the entities inside. The wind died instantly. The temperature began to normalize. Their flashlights flickered back to life, illuminating the 4 children huddled together on the floor, disoriented but alive. Elizabeth, the oldest at 12, was the first to speak. Her voice was thin and quavering, unused for over a century. "Are we free?" Eleanor knelt beside them, tears in her eyes. "Yes, you're free." Dawn broke over Hollowbrook Estate, pale light filtering through the east-facing windows. Eleanor, James, and Dr. Blackwood sat in the kitchen with the 4 Hollowbrook children, trying to comprehend the impossible situation they now faced. "What year is it?" Elizabeth asked, her voice growing stronger with use. Though physically still a child of 12, her eyes held the wisdom and weariness of the 113 years she had endured. "It's 2025, Eleanor told her gently. The children exchanged glances, the enormity of what had happened beginning to sink in. Little Henry, only 6 years old, began to cry softly, and Catherine put her arm around him. "Everyone we knew is gone," Edward said, his voice flat with shock. "Mother, father, your parents searched for you," Eleanor assured them. "Especially your mother. She never stopped believing you were trapped in the mirror." Dr. Blackwood, his hand now bandaged, looked haunted. "I'm so sorry for what my great-grandfather did to you. I can't imagine how to begin making amends." Elizabeth regarded him with eyes too old for her young face. "You freed us. That's enough." The practical problems they faced were daunting. 4 children from 1912, with no birth certificates, no social security numbers, no vaccinations, and no formal education beyond the early 20th century. Children who were, legally speaking, over 120 years old, yet physically still young. "We can't involve the authorities," James pointed out. "They'd never believe the truth." and the children would become lab experiments or worse. I have a sister in Vermont, Dr. Blackwood offered hesitantly. She and her husband live on a farm, homeschool their kids. They single quotes redot. Unconventional but kind. They might be willing to take the children in, at least temporarily. Eleanor nodded slowly. We'd need to create some form of documentation. A cover story. Distant relatives orphaned in a tragedy, James suggested. It's close enough to the truth, as they discussed possibilities. Henry wandered to the kitchen window, pressing his small face against the glass to look out at a world transformed since his imprisonment. Cars moved along the distant road, and an airplane traced a white line across the morning sky. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the plane. Edward joined him. "It's like a flying machine. Remember the stories about the Wright brothers in the newspaper? They really did it." The simple exchange crystallized the extraordinary challenges these children would face, adjusting to the 21st century. Everything from indoor plumbing to smartphones would be miraculous to them. They would need time, protection, and guidance to adapt. "We should leave soon," Dr. Blackwood said, "before the museum staff arrives. I can call my sister from the road." They gathered what supplies they could, clothes from the museum's collection that would help the children, blend in temporarily, food from the staff break room, first aid supplies. Dr. Blackwood left a note claiming family emergency, and they slipped out through the service entrance just as the sun cleared the horizon. The children's reaction to the modern world was a mixture of terror and wonder. They clung to each other in Dr. Blackwood's SUV, eyes wide as they drove through Springfield. The noise, the speed, the sheer number of people and buildings overwhelmed them. "It's too much," Catherine whispered, her face pale. "Everything's so fast." "We'll take it slow," Eleanor promised her. "One day at a time." They stopped at a small motel outside the city, where Dr. Blackwood paid cash for 2 rooms. While the children marveled at electric lights and running water, the adults conferred in hushed voices. "My sister will take them," Dr. Blackwood confirmed after a phone call. She didn't ask too many questions, thankfully. She and Robert have always wanted a big family. "What about the mirror?" James asked. "We can't just leave it there for someone else to find and potentially release those things inside." Dr. Blackwood's expression darkened. "We need to destroy it, permanently. The book mentions a ritual for that too, but it requires more than just my blood. It needs to be performed at the right time." "The winter solstice," Eleanor said, remembering a passage from the Black Book. "The darkest day when the boundary between worlds is thinnest. That's over 2 months away. Until then, I'll make sure the master bedroom remains locked and off limits to visitors," Dr. Blackwood promised. "I'll tell the board we're doing preservation work." Eleanor watched through the window as Elizabeth helped. Henry washed his hands in the motel bathroom, patiently showing him how to use the faucet. Despite everything they'd endured, the children still behaved like siblings, arguing one minute, protective the next. "They're remarkably resilient," she observed, "but they have a long adjustment ahead." "We all do," James replied softly. "Nothing about our understanding of history of reality can be the same after this." Over the next 3 days, they prepared for the journey to Vermont. Dr. Blackwood used contacts in the academic world to begin creating a paper trail for the children, starting with temporary documentation identifying them as distant Blackwood relatives recently orphaned in a house fire overseas. Eleanor focused on helping the children adjust, explaining basic modern concepts and technology. Edward proved the quickest study, fascinated by James's smartphone and absorbing information with remarkable speed. Catherine was more hesitant but determined to understand this new world. Elizabeth, as the oldest, seemed most concerned with protecting her siblings' emotional well-being, while Henry simply followed along, wide-eyed and overwhelmed. On the 4th morning, they set out for Vermont in Dr. Blackwood's SUV, the children dressed in modern clothes purchased from a department store. The long drive would give them time to gradually acclimate to the 21st century and prepare for their new life. "What will happen to us now?" Elizabeth asked Eleanor as they watched the Missouri landscape roll past. "You'll stay with Dr. Blackwood's sister and her family while we figure things out," Eleanor explained. "It's a farm quiet, away from the overwhelming parts of modern life. You'll have time to adjust. And then?" the girl persisted. "We don't belong here." Eleanor took her hand. "You belong in the world of the living, Elizabeth. The wind doesn't matter so much. People will help you." "We'll help you." As they crossed state lines, Eleanor thought about the historical implications of their discovery. 4 living witnesses to daily life in 1912 Missouri. The temptation to interview them, to document everything they remembered, was strong, but they deserved to be children first, not research subjects. That evening, at another roadside motel, Dr. Blackwood received a disturbing call from his assistant at the museum. "Someone broke into the master bedroom last night," he reported to Eleanor and James after hanging up. "Nothing was taken, but the lock was forced. The mirror is still there, apparently undisturbed. Who would break in just to look at the mirror?" James wondered. A chill ran through Eleanor. Unless they knew what it was. "Dr. Blackwood, did your great-grandfather have any other descendants?" The curator's face paled. "I don't know. It's possible. The family records aren't complete." "We need to accelerate our timeline for destroying the mirror," Eleanor decided. "We can't wait for the winter solstice." "The ritual won't work at any other time," Dr. Blackwood objected. "Then we need to hide the mirror somewhere until then," she insisted. "Somewhere no one will find it." They agreed that James would return to Springfield the next day, while Eleanor and Dr. Blackwood continued to Vermont with the children. James would retrieve the mirror and transport it to a secure location until they could perform the destruction ritual. That night, Eleanor woke suddenly, unsure what had disturbed her sleep. She checked on the children, finding them all asleep except Edward, who stood by the window staring out at the parking lot. "Can't sleep?" she asked gently. He turned, his expression troubled. "I can feel it still, the mirror, like it's pulling at me." Eleanor felt a chill. "You're safe now, Edward." "The mirror can't hurt you anymore. It's not trying to hurt me," the boy said, his voice eerily calm. "It's trying to warn me. Something's coming." James arrived back at Hollowbrook Estate the next morning, finding the museum closed due to the break-in. Yellow police tape blocked the main entrance, but he used the service door key Dr. Blackwood had given him. The house felt different now, hostile, as if aware of their intention to destroy the mirror. As James climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, the temperature dropped noticeably, his breath clouding before him despite the building's heating system. The bedroom door stood partially open, the lock mechanism splintered from the break-in. James pushed it wide and stepped inside, immediately sensing something wrong. The mirror still hung on the wall, but its surface was different, clearer somehow, more reflective, as if newly polished. As he approached cautiously, James noticed smudges on the glass fingerprints that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Someone had touched the mirror, perhaps unwittingly activating it. He pulled out his phone to call Dr. Blackwood, but there was no signal. With growing unease, he moved closer to examine the mirror, careful not to touch its surface. The inscription on the frame seemed more deeply etched than before, the Latin words almost luminous. As James leaned in to look, his reflection shifted, just for an instant, revealing not his own face, but something else, something with hollow eyes and a hungry smile. James stumbled backward, heart pounding. This was worse than they'd thought. The mirror was active again, and whatever remained trapped inside was gaining strength. He needed to get the mirror out now. Using heavy gloves from his bag, he attempted to lift it from its mounting brackets, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the mirror had become part of the wall itself, refusing to be removed. A sound behind him, footsteps in the hallway, made him freeze. The police returning? Museum staff? He waited, listening as the steps approached the door, too light and deliberate to be casual. A woman appeared in the doorway, elegant in a tailored suit, her silver hair cut in a severe bob. Her eyes fixed on James with calculating intensity. "So Martin sent his associate to collect the family heirloom," she said, her voice cultured but cold. "How predictable." James tensed. "Who are you?" "Evelyn Blackwood," she replied. "Martin's aunt, though he doesn't know I exist. Our branch of the family preferred to remain disconnected from the mainstream Blackwoods." James's mind raced. Another descendant of Desmond Blackwood, one who apparently knew about the mirror. "The mirror isn't just an heirloom," he said carefully. "It's dangerous." Evelyn laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Of course it is. That's what makes it valuable. My grandfather taught me everything Desmond discovered about soul collection. The mirror is the most powerful artifact in existence. It destroyed your ancestor," James countered. "It'll destroy you too." Her smile tightened. "Desmond made mistakes. He was greedy, tried to take too many souls at once. I'll be more selective." She stepped into the room, and James noticed she wore gloves, thin leather, elegant but practical. "Protection for handling the mirror. You freed the children," she continued. "I felt the disturbance. But there are many more souls inside, centuries of collection. So much power waiting to be harnessed." James edged toward the door. "You're insane if you think you can control what's in there." "I've spent my entire life studying the ars speculorum," Evelyn said, her voice hardening. "Unlike Martin, who ignored his heritage, I embraced it. Now step aside. The mirror belongs to me." James lunged for the door, but Evelyn was surprisingly fast for her age. She blocked his path, producing a small object from her pocket, an antique key with the same circular symbol engraved on its handle. "The original key to the mirror's power," she explained, her eyes gleaming. "One of many artifacts Desmond created. This one opens more than just doors. She inserted the key into the air before the mirror as if unlocking an invisible lock. The glass rippled in response, and James felt a sudden pull toward its surface. He resisted, grabbing the bedpost for support as the force strengthened. "You can't fight it," Evelyn said calmly. "The mirror recognizes you now. You've been marked by your contact with the freed souls." James's feet slid across the wooden floor despite his resistance. The mirror's surface had become like quicksilver, moving and pulsing with unnatural life. Within its depths, he glimpsed faces, dozens of them, pressing against the boundary, reaching for him. With desperate strength, he tore a heavy candlestick from the bedside table and hurled it at the mirror. Evelyn screamed in protest, but too late. The metal struck the glass and passed straight through, vanishing into the mirror world. The surface didn't break. It simply absorbed the projectile. "Fool," Evelyn hissed. "The mirror can't be destroyed by ordinary means. You've only made it angry." The pull intensified, and James felt his grip on the bedpost weakening. In a final desperate move, he released his hold and threw himself sideways, away from the mirror's direct line. He crashed into Evelyn, sending them both tumbling to the floor. The key flew from her hand, sliding across the hardwood. James scrambled toward it, fingers closing around the cold metal just before Evelyn could reach it. "Give that back," she demanded, her composure cracking. James backed toward the door, clutching the key. "This ends now." Evelyn's expression contorted with rage. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. That mirror contains power beyond your comprehension." "I've seen what it does," James retorted. "It destroys lives." He turned to flee, but the bedroom door slammed shut on its own. The temperature plunged further, frost forming instantly on the windows and furniture. The mirror's surface roiled like a storm-tossed sea, and within it, the trapped souls had formed a single mass of darkness that pressed against the glass. "Now you've done it," Evelyn whispered, fear finally entering her voice. "You've weakened the barrier." The darkness within the mirror began to seep through, like ink spreading through water. It coalesced into tendrils that reached toward them, seeking, hungry. James clutched the key, remembering something from the Black Book. "This key unlocks the mirror," he reasoned aloud. "So it must also be able to lock it." Evelyn lunged at him, but the darkness reached her first. A tendril wrapped around her ankle, and she screamed as it began to pull her toward the mirror. James watched in horror as her body elongated unnaturally, stretched toward the glass like taffy. "Help me!" she shrieked, all pretense of control gone. James hesitated only a moment before jamming the key into the air before the mirror and turning it, counterclockwise, the motion for locking rather than unlocking. There was resistance, as if he were turning the key in thick mud, but gradually it moved. The effect was immediate. The tendrils of darkness recoiled, retreating reluctantly back into the mirror. Evelyn collapsed to the floor, gasping. Her body returned to normal, but her face ashen with shock. The mirror's surface calmed, returning to ordinary glass, though James could still sense the malevolence lurking within. The key in his hand grew ice-cold, then crumbled to dust, its power apparently spent in the ceiling. "It's temporarily contained," he said, helping the shaken Evelyn to her feet. "But we need to destroy it permanently." She stared at the mirror, her ambition visibly warring with her fear after what she'd experienced. Finally, she nodded. "The winter solstice ritual," she said quietly. "It's the only way." The farm in Vermont was everything Dr. Blackwood had promised. Sprawling 19th century. Homestead nestled in rolling hills, far from the overwhelming modernity of cities. His sister Rebecca and her husband Robert welcomed the children with compassionate curiosity, asking few questions about their unusual circumstances. "They need time and space," Rebecca said simply. "We have plenty of both here." The Hollowbrook children adapted to their new surroundings with varying degrees of success. Henry, the youngest, adjusted most easily, delighted by the animals and open spaces. Catherine found comfort in the familiar rhythms of farm life, not so different from what she had known in 1912. Edward alternated between fascination with modern technology and periods of quiet withdrawal, while Elizabeth remained watchful, protective, struggling with her displacement in time. Eleanor stayed with them, helping to bridge the gap between their Edwardian upbringing and the bewildering present. Dr. Blackwood returned to Missouri to assist James and, surprisingly, Evelyn in preparing for the mirror's destruction. "I don't trust her," he told Eleanor by phone. "But she knows more about the mirror than any of us. We need her expertise." "The children are sensing something," Eleanor reported. "Especially Edward. He has nightmares about the mirror. Says it's trying to reach him. The connection hasn't been fully severed," Dr. Blackwood confirmed grimly. "That's why we need to destroy it soon. The winter solstice is in 3 weeks." Eleanor hung up and found Elizabeth sitting on the farmhouse porch. watching her siblings play in the autumn leaves with Rebecca's children. Despite wearing modern clothes, jeans and a sweat, Elizabeth still carried herself with the formal posture of her era. "You're worried about something," the girl observed, as Eleanor joined her. "Just thinking about the mirror," Eleanor admitted. "We need to make sure it can never trap anyone again." Elizabeth hugged her knees to her chest. "It's not just the mirror," she said softly. "It's what's inside it. The others. They were people once, like us. But they've been in there so long they've changed. What do you remember about being inside?" Eleanor asked gently. The girl stared into the distance. Time didn't work the same way. Sometimes it felt like days, sometimes like centuries. We stayed together, the four of us. That kept us ... ourselves. The others were alone when they were taken. They forgot who they were. How many others are there? Dozens, maybe hundreds, from different times, different places. The mirror has existed for centuries. Elizabeth turned to Eleanor, her eyes suddenly fierce. "You can't just destroy it with them still inside. They deserve freedom too." Eleanor was taken aback. "But you said yourself they've changed." "If we release them, not release them into this world," Elizabeth clarified. "Release them from existence. Let them finally rest." Eleanor considered this. "The ritual we found only destroys the mirror itself. I don't know if that frees the souls or just ... ends them." "You need to find out," Elizabeth insisted. "Promise me you won't just destroy the mirror without knowing what happens to those trapped inside. Even the ones that have become monsters deserve peace." Before Eleanor could respond, Edward came running up to them, his face pale. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice tight with fear. "I can feel it. The mirror, it's changing." Miles away in a secure storage facility outside Springfield, where they had finally managed to relocate the mirror, James and Dr. Blackwood stood with Evelyn Blackwood staring at the ancient artifact. The mirror's surface had developed a spiderweb of fine cracks, though the glass remained intact. "It's failing," Evelyn explained, her earlier hunger for power now tempered by grim understanding. "The barrier between worlds is weakening." "I thought you locked it," Dr. Blackwood said to James. "I did, with the key. But it crumbled afterward." "The seal must have been temporary." Evelyn nodded. "The original keys were designed to control access to the mirror's power, not to contain it permanently. Nothing can do that except the destruction ritual." They had secured the storage unit with every protection they could devise: salt lines, religious symbols from various faiths, even iron chains wrapped around the mirror's frame. But these were stopgap measures at best. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Dr. Blackwood decided. "We can't wait for the winter solstice." Evelyn shook her head emphatically. "The ritual won't work at any other time. The celestial alignment is crucial." "Then what do you suggest?" James demanded. "We just wait while that thing breaks open?" Evelyn hesitated, then opened her elegant leather handbag. From it she withdrew a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn with age. "Desmond's personal diary," she explained. "It contains observations he never included in the formal grimoire. There might be another way to strengthen the containment until the solstice." The diary was written in a cramped, difficult hand, with diagrams and calculations in the margins. As they pored over it, Dr. Blackwood found a passage describing an emergency sealing ritual. "Should the vessel become unstable," he read aloud, "a temporary binding may be achieved through the combined blood of 7 individuals who have gazed upon the captive souls." 7? James looked up. "There's only 3 of us here who've seen inside the mirror." 5 if we count Eleanor and the curator who was with you," Evelyn added. "And the Hollowbrook children make 9, Dr. Blackwood finished. "More than enough." James frowned. "We are not involving those children in this. They've been through enough." "We may not have a choice," Evelyn said coldly. "If the mirror breaks open before the solstice, everything within it will escape. Not just the few trapped souls you care about, but centuries of accumulated darkness. Do you understand what that would mean?" Before James could respond, a sound emerged from the mirror, a high, thin keening like metal under stress. The cracks in its surface widened slightly, and for an instant they all glimpsed movement within shadowy forms pressing against the weakening barrier. Dr. Blackwood pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Eleanor. We need those children here." "Martin, no," James protested. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Evelyn said with finality. "We need their blood for the seal. Just a few drops from each. A small price to prevent catastrophe." As they argued, none of them noticed the temperature dropping steadily in the storage unit, frost forming on the walls, or the shadows in the corners deepening, stretching toward them with purpose. Eleanor refused to bring the children back to Missouri. "They're finally starting to heal," she told Dr. Blackwood firmly over the phone. "I won't drag them back into this nightmare." "Eleanor, you don't understand the danger," he insisted. "The mirror is breaking. Whatever's inside will get out." "Then bring the mirror here," she countered. "If their blood is truly necessary, we'll do it on their terms, in a place where they feel safe." After heated debate, they agreed. Transporting the increasingly unstable mirror would be dangerous, but leaving it in the storage unit was no longer an option. The cracks had continued to spread, and strange phenomena had begun to manifest around it. Objects moving on their own, impossible sounds, glimpses of things that shouldn't exist in reality. 2 days later, a specially outfitted van arrived at the Vermont farm, driven by James with Dr. Blackwood and Evelyn as passengers. The mirror, wrapped in protective coverings marked with symbols from Desmond's diary, was secured in the back. Rebecca and Robert had taken their own children to stay with relatives, leaving the farmhouse to the Hollowbrook children and their unusual guardians. Eleanor had explained the situation to Elizabeth, who had then helped prepare her siblings. "We need to finish what we started," the girl told them solemnly, "so we can truly be free." The mirror was carefully carried into the barn, which had been cleared and prepared according to Evelyn's instructions. Symbols were chalked on the wooden floor, candles positioned at cardinal points, and the black book opened to the pages describing the winter solstice ritual. When the coverings were removed from the mirror, everyone gasped. Its surface was a maze of cracks, through which oily darkness seemed to pulse like blood through veins. The reflective quality was almost gone, replaced by a depthless void that hurt the eyes to look upon. "It's worse than I thought," Evelyn murmured. "We need to perform the sealing immediately." The temporary ritual required blood from 7 individuals who had seen the souls within the mirror. A small silver bowl was placed before the mirror, and one by one they each contributed a few drops from shallow cuts on their palms. Dr. Blackwood, James, Eleanor, Evelyn, and the 4 Hollowbrook children. As Henry, the last to participate, squeezed his small hand over the bowl, the combined blood began to move on its own, swirling into patterns that matched the symbols on the floor. Evelyn began the incantation, her voice steady with the confidence of lifelong study. The Latin phrases seemed to hang in the air, visible as brief shimmers of light before fading. As she spoke the final words, Dr. Blackwood poured the blood onto the mirror's surface. Instead of dripping down the glass, the blood was absorbed into it, the red liquid disappearing into the cracks. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cracks began to seal themselves, the darkness receding, the mirror's surface becoming whole again. "It worked," James breathed in relief. Evelyn nodded, though her expression remained tense. "Temporarily, this will hold until the winter solstice, but no longer." Elizabeth stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the mirror. "I want to see them," she said quietly. "See who?" Eleanor asked. "The others. One last time." Before anyone could stop her, Elizabeth placed her hand against the newly sealed glass. Instead of rippling or yielding as before, the surface remained solid, but the reflection changed. Where there should have been the image of the barn interior, they instead saw a vast gray space filled with indistinct figures, dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, some human in appearance, others grotesquely transformed. "They were all people once," Elizabeth said softly. "Some have been there for centuries. They deserve to rest." Eleanor joined her, placing a supportive hand on the girl's shoulder. "The destruction ritual, will it free them or just destroy the mirror?" It was Evelyn who answered, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "According to Desmond's research, breaking the mirror's power should release all souls trapped within it. Those who retain enough of their humanity may pass on naturally. Those who have been corrupted may simply cease to exist." Elizabeth nodded, satisfied. "That's what we need to do then. Set them all free." The next 3 weeks passed in intense preparation. The mirror remained stable, sealed by their combined blood, but they took no chances, maintaining a constant watch rotation. The winter solstice, December 21st, approached with agonizing slowness. During this time, Eleanor observed how the temporary sealing had affected the Hollowbrook children. They seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been partially lifted. They spoke more about their past lives, sharing memories of their parents, their home, their lost world. It was a kind of therapy, Eleanor realized, a necessary step in their healing. On the morning of the solstice, they gathered in the barn once more. The ritual would need to be performed at exactly noon. When the sun reached its lowest point in the northern hemisphere sky, outside snow fell in thick, silent flakes, blanketing the farm in pristine white. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked the children. They nodded, solemn but determined. Even little Henry understood the importance of what they were about to do. Evelyn had prepared the ritual space with meticulous care, positioning each element according to the Black Book's instructions. At the center stood the mirror, temporarily uncovered, its surface once again showing signs of stress, fine lines appearing and disappearing like breathing. The destruction ritual is more complex than the sealing, Evelyn explained. It requires not just blood, but intention. Each participant must genuinely desire the mirror's end. She looked pointedly at herself as she said this. Everyone understood the significance. Evelyn had coveted the mirror's power her entire life, and now she had to sincerely wish for its destruction. "I've seen what it truly is," she said quietly, as if reading their thoughts. "Power, yes, but at too great a cost." As noon approached, they took their positions in a circle around the mirror. The ritual began with a Latin invocation, spoken by Dr. Blackwood and Evelyn alternately, their voices weaving together in the cold air of the barn. Each participant then stepped forward to place their bloodied palm against the mirror's surface, speaking a phrase in English, "I release you from this world." When all had completed this step, Evelyn lifted a heavy iron hammer inscribed with symbols matching those on the mirror's frame. "Once I strike, there's no turning back," she warned. "Whatever happens, do not break the circle." The tension in the barn was palpable as they waited for the exact moment of the solstice. James watched his wristwatch, counting down the seconds aloud. 3.2.1. Now. Evelyn brought the hammer down on the mirror center with all her strength. The glass shattered with an impossible sound, not the crash of breaking glass, but a high, piercing note that vibrated through their bones. The fragments didn't fall, but hung suspended in the air, each shard containing a portion of the darkness within. Wind roared through the barn, though the doors and windows were closed. The candles flared into columns of flame that reached toward the rafters. Through the broken shards, they glimpsed the gray void beyond, and the countless souls trapped there. The souls began to move, streaming toward the broken barrier. Some appeared as little more than wisps of light, others as more substantial human forms, still others as twisted, shadowy things that barely resembled people. They poured through the floating shards, momentarily visible in the barn before dissolving like smoke. Elizabeth gasped, pointing. Among the escaping souls were recognizable faces, men and women from different eras. Children, elderly, all bearing the same expression of confused relief. They were free, passing from the mirror's prison to whatever lay beyond. But not all the entities accepted this transition peacefully. As the procession of souls continued, darker shapes began to emerge. The corrupted ones, those who had been trapped so long they had lost all humanity. These moved differently, fighting against the current, clawing at the edges of reality. One particularly massive shadow pushed through, materializing partially in the barn, a writhing mass of darkness with too many limbs and eyes that burned like coals. It lunged toward Henry, the youngest and most vulnerable. Edward didn't hesitate. He broke the circle, throwing himself between his brother and the entity. "You can't have him," he shouted. "He can't have any of us anymore." The shadow recoiled at the boy's defiance, then tried to move around him toward the others. But now Elizabeth and Catherine had joined their brother, the 4 Hollowbrook children standing together against the darkness that had imprisoned them for so long. "You don't belong here," Elizabeth told it, her voice steady and clear. "Let go. Be free." The entity seemed to hesitate, its form fluctuating between monstrous and human. For a moment they glimpsed what it had once been, a man in clothing centuries old, his expression one of terrible loneliness. Then, with what sounded almost like a sigh, it surrendered to the pull, dissolving like the others into nothingness. The procession of souls continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, the last wisp of light passed through the broken mirror, and the floating shards fell to the ground, inert and ordinary. The ritual was complete. The mirror was destroyed, its power broken, its captives freed. In the silence that followed, little Henry spoke first. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. Eleanor knelt beside him, gathering all 4 children into her arms. "Yes," she assured them. "It's truly over now." And for the first time since their release from the mirror's prison, the Hollowbrook children began to cry, not from fear or grief, but from relief. Over a century of captivity had finally irrevocably ended. Epilogue. New Reflections spring came to the Vermont farm, melting the snow and bringing new growth to fields that had lain dormant through winter. In the farmhouse kitchen, Eleanor put the finishing touches on a birthday cake, Henry's first celebration of his second life, as the children had come to call their existence after the mirror. The past months had seen remarkable transformations. With the mirror destroyed and their connection to it severed, the Hollowbrook children had begun to truly heal. They still carried the knowledge and memories of their original time, but they embraced their new reality with increasing confidence. Dr. Blackwood had used his academic connections to create legal identities for them as distant relatives under his guardianship. They had begun homeschooling with Rebecca, gradually integrating modern knowledge with their Edwardian education. Evelyn Blackwood surprisingly had remained in contact. The destruction of the mirror had changed her too, freeing her from the obsession that had consumed her life. She now used her extensive knowledge of historical artifacts to help museums identify potentially dangerous items, preventing others from falling victim to objects like the mirror. As for the Hollowbrook estate, it had been temporarily closed for renovations. The true story of what had happened there would never be publicly known, but the master bedroom had been permanently sealed, its walls reinforced with concrete, a precaution against any lingering influence. Eleanor watched through the window as James helped Edward set up a telescope in the yard. The boy had developed a passionate interest in astronomy, perhaps because the stars were one constant between his past and present. Catherine was in the garden with Rebecca, learning about plants that would have been familiar to her in 1912. While Elizabeth sat on the porch swing writing in a journal, her way of processing all she had experienced. They would never be normal children, Eleanor knew. How could they be after living through what they had? But they were adapting, growing, finding joy again. The mirror had stolen their first chance at life, but it hadn't destroyed their capacity to embrace a second one. When Henry blew out his candles that evening, surrounded by his siblings and their new extended family, Eleanor asked what he had wished for. The boy smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, not the solemn expression he had worn for so long. "I didn't wish for anything," he said. "I already have everything I need." As night fell over the farmhouse, 4 children who had once been reflections gazed up at the stars, no longer prisoners, their souls firmly their own. And somewhere beyond the boundaries of the physical world, hundreds of others who had been trapped for centuries finally found the peace that had long been denied them. In the attic of the farmhouse, carefully wrapped and stored in a locked trunk, the black book remained, a reminder of dangers best left undisturbed. Beside it lay a small fragment of the mirror's frame, the Latin inscription still visible: Animi speculo captus, souls captured in glass, but no more.